Let's be honest, the traditional path to happiness is broken. We live in an era of unprecedented wealth, access, and self-help literature. Yet anxiety and depression metrics continue to soar. We are told to be positive, to visualize success, to chase happiness like a butterfly. But what if the relentless obsessive pursuit of feeling good is precisely the mechanism that is making us feel profoundly inadequate? This is the central thesis of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson, a book that trades sugary positivity for a bracing shot of cold, hard reality. This book is a counterintuitive masterpiece, arguing that the true path to a meaningful life lies not in avoiding negative experiences, but in radically embracing them. Manson's core philosophy is a paradox. The less you care about trivial things, the more capacity you have to care deeply, fiercely, and intelligently about the few things that genuinely matter. This is the subtle art. It's not apathy. It is the intentional, disciplined focus on what suffering you are willing to endure. We are going to dissect the brutal and liberating principles that define a life lived by choice, not by default. Our deep dive will focus on 5 major philosophical shifts required to master the subtle art. First, we must escape the feedback loop from hell. This is the cultural trap where the pressure to be positive makes you miserable about being miserable. Manson introduces the backwards law. The more you chase an ideal, the more it eludes you. By accepting the inevitability of pain, we reclaim our emotional balance. We will see this through the lens of the famous cynical writer Charles Bukowski, who found salvation not in ambition, but in resigned persistence. Second, we will learn the true meaning of not giving a fuck. It's not indifference. It's about having a finely tuned emotional compass. Life is suffering, and the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the suffering you choose to embrace. We will explore how choosing your suffering, the pain, the struggle, the sacrifice, is the ultimate act of self-definition. Third, we must destroy the cult of exceptionalism. We have been raised to believe we are all destined for greatness, but this belief cripples us when faced with the harsh reality of mediocrity. Manson argues that accepting your ordinariness is the single most liberating act you can perform, freeing you from the tyranny of external expectation and the crippling fear of failure. Fourth, we will adopt the responsibility mantra. This is the hardest truth. You are not at fault for everything that happens to you, but you are 100% responsible for how you respond to it. This distinction, fault versus responsibility, is the key to eliminating the toxic and paralyzing victim mindset. We will explore how taking radical responsibility, even for things outside your control, restores your power. Finally, we will face the ultimate truths, uncertainty and death. Manson insists that the fear of death and the fear of being wrong prevent us from living authentically. By embracing uncertainty, the "I could be wrong" principle, we ensure perpetual growth. And by accepting the finality of death, we gain the necessary perspective to prioritize our limited time. This journey is not about finding quick fixes. It is about building emotional muscle and a steel-hard moral compass. Get ready to stop chasing the illusion of a problem-free life and start choosing the problems that define the meaning of your existence. The feedback loop from hell. Don't try. The foundational concept of Mark Manson's work is a direct challenge to the modern self-help industry. The insistence on constant positivity and the relentless pursuit of happiness is emotionally damaging. This damage manifests as the feedback loop from hell. A deep dive into the loop. Manson details how this loop operates. You experience a normal negative emotion, such as sadness, anxiety, or frustration. In a culture saturated with messages about how you should be happy, you immediately judge that negative emotion. You become anxious about being anxious, guilty about being guilty, or sad about being sad. This secondary level of judgment amplifies the initial feeling, creating a rapidly escalating spiral of misery. The problem is no longer the initial event. The problem is your emotional reaction to your emotional reaction. Manson's first, most counterintuitive piece of advice is therefore, don't try. Stop trying to force positivity. Stop trying to silence the negative feelings. When you simply accept without judgment that you feel anxious, the emotional energy is immediately dissipated. The loop breaks, and you can focus on the source of the anxiety rather than the secondary emotional noise. The anti-positivity stance and the backwards law. This acceptance of the negative is rooted in what Manson calls the backwards law, the law of reversal, adapted from the philosopher Alan Watts. The backwards law states that the more you pursue feeling good, the less satisfied you become, because the very act of pursuing happiness reinforces the idea that you currently lack happiness. The pursuit itself creates the absence. Manson extends this. The chase for security breeds insecurity. The chase for calm breeds agitation. The chase for love breeds loneliness. To be truly content, you must not seek contentment. You must accept the inevitable presence of struggle and dissatisfaction. The tale of Charles Bukowski. To illustrate the power of this acceptance, Manson introduces the life and work of the poet Charles Bukowski. Bukowski was not a success story in the traditional sense. He was a perennial drunk, a degenerate, a deeply flawed man who struggled for decades in poverty and obscurity. His life was defined by failure and rejection. Yet his eventual success came not from striving for greatness, but from simply reporting the reality of his miserable, hard-luck life. The moral of Bukowski's story, according to Manson, is found in his epitaph, "Don't try." This isn't an endorsement of laziness. It's an endorsement of radical honesty and persistence in the face of inevitable failure. Bukowski succeeded because he stopped trying to be a great writer and started being exactly who he was, honestly chronicling his flaws. He chose to accept his low status and his constant pain, and that acceptance ironically elevated him. He gave a fuck about his writing, his core value, and stopped giving a fuck about the world's opinion of him. Expanding on societal conditioning, Manson argues that this toxic cycle is driven by the modern media's portrayal of exceptionalism. We are constantly bombarded with the best of the best in social media feeds, news headlines, and advertising. This creates an impossible standard, making us feel that if we are not constantly feeling great and succeeding spectacularly, we are failures. This leads to a pervasive sense of entitlement to positive feelings. Many people now believe they deserve to be happy, loved, and successful without the requisite hard work and pain. Manson states that this feeling of entitlement is the root of the problem. When life inevitably delivers pain, which it always does, the entitled person feels wronged, and the feedback loop spirals out of control. The power of the negativity. By embracing the negative, the anxiety, the failure, the guilt, you weaponize your emotions. Negative emotions are not inherently bad, they are action signals for improvement. Anxiety signals a threat. Guilt signals a violation of a core value. Sadness signals a loss. If you suppress these signals with forced positivity, you eliminate the very tools you need to course-correct your life. The first step toward the subtle art is the willingness to look at the worst parts of your life and simply say, yes, this is hard, and that's okay. That is the moment the feedback loop from hell loses its power. The 3 subtle arts. Choosing your suffering. Manson transitions from debunking false philosophies to establishing his own, centered on the idea that life is defined by the problems you choose to solve. This chapter focuses on the choice inherent in not giving a fuck. It's a conscious, disciplined act of prioritization. Defining the subtle art. Manson clarifies that not giving a fuck has 3 meanings: indifference to adversity, Not caring about minor, trivial inconveniences, e.g., getting a bad parking spot, a minor insult. Caring about important things, reserving your limited energy for relationships, family, health, and passion. Accepting the struggle, choosing to suffer the pain that your core values demand. The most crucial of these is the third. Manson states unequivocally, happiness requires struggle. The secret is not to find a way to eliminate suffering, but to find the suffering you love to endure. The unbreakable connection between desire and pain. Every single choice, desire, and value is inextricably linked to a problem. Desire, to have a beautiful body. Problem, endless hours of pain, hunger, and discipline at the gym. Desire, to have a lasting relationship. Problem, endless conflict, vulnerability, and sacrificing ego. Desire, to be a master musician. Problem, thousands of hours of tedious practice and failure. Manson argues that most people want the reward without wanting the process. They want the result, but they don't want the accompanying pain. The true test of a value is not whether you enjoy the outcome, but whether you can sustain the pain required to get there. If you hate the pain of practice, you don't really love the violin. You love the idea of being a violinist. The problem of metrics and values. Manson dedicates significant space to distinguishing between good values and bad values, the metrics by which we measure our lives. Bad values, external, uncontrollable. Pleasure, fleeting, requires constant upkeep, and is easily addictive, e.g., drugs, superficial sex. Material success leads to the hedonic treadmill. The more you get, the faster your expectation rises. Always being right, impossible, isolates you and prevents growth. External validation, being liked, uncontrollable and makes your emotional state dependent on the whims of others. Good values, internal, controllable. Honesty, completely within your control, requires vulnerability. Innovation, creativity, focused on the process of creation, not the result. Discipline, work ethic, controllable, requires effort and builds self-esteem. Vulnerability, necessary for true connection, requires courage. Manson's message is that if you choose bad values, you give a fuck about things you cannot control, leading to endless anxiety and disappointment. If you choose good values, you give a fuck about things you can control, your effort, your character, your reaction, leading to sustainable self-esteem. The story of the samurai, the philosophy of choice. Manson uses the story of the samurai to illustrate the power of intentional suffering. A samurai did not value the outcome of the fight. He valued his honor, his discipline, and his commitment to the blade. If he lost the fight but maintained his discipline, his value system remained intact. The modern equivalent is focusing on the effort and the integrity of the process, rather than the gold medal or the paycheck. The external result is merely a side effect. The internal commitment is the true measure of a man. This deepens the argument. When you choose your suffering, you choose your identity. You are not special, the cult of exceptionalism. This chapter tackles one of the most dangerous myths of the modern Western world, the belief that everyone is special, destined for something great, and entitled to a life free from pain. Manson argues that this belief system, the cult of exceptionalism, is a catastrophic lie that breeds a generation paralyzed by a fear of failure. The myth of exceptionalism and entitlement. Manson traces the cultural shift where participation trophies replaced merit, and every childhood flaw was labeled as uniquely gifted. While intended to boost self-esteem, the result was the opposite. A deep-seated entitlement, the belief that one deserves positive experiences without the necessary struggle. When the entitled person faces a real challenge, they don't see it as an opportunity. They see it as a violation of their rights. This mindset prevents them from taking responsibility, because if they are exceptional, any problem must be the world's fault. The liberating power of mediocrity. Manson makes the radical claim that embracing mediocrity is profoundly liberating. Most of what we do in life, driving, making coffee, filing paperwork, parenting, is, by definition, ordinary. We are statistically average at most things. Obsessing over being an outlier in every single area of life is a debilitating fantasy. When you accept that you are statistically average, you are immediately freed from the tyranny of external comparison. You can focus your energy on becoming truly exceptional in one or two areas you genuinely care about, while comfortably accepting being average everywhere else. Mediocrity is the emotional baseline from which true, sustainable achievement is launched. The problem with constant happiness. Manson uses the story of a rock star who had all the external markers of success, but was deeply unhappy to show that external exceptionalism does not solve internal problems. Happiness is not a function of exceptional success. It is a function of solving problems based on good values. The right to choose your struggle, not your feelings. A key element of entitlement is the belief that one is entitled to feel good all the time, what Manson calls the right to feel. This is fundamentally impossible. Life constantly delivers pain, loss, and disappointment. Manson argues that you only have the right to choose the metric by which you struggle, not the outcome of the struggle, and certainly not your feelings. You have the right to choose to work hard on your marriage, but you don't have the right to a feeling of security. You have the right to choose to be honest, but you don't have the right to feel instantly loved. By trading the right to feel good for the right to choose your struggle, you shift your power from external hope to internal action. The emotional roller coaster and the action principle. Manson reinforces the idea that action precedes motivation. People who wait for inspiration or for a feeling of being special before they start are paralyzed. Action is the solution. You don't need to feel great to start working. You need to start working to feel great. By embracing the fact that you are an ordinary person doing difficult, ordinary work, you build the resilient self-esteem that truly lasts. You stop giving a fuck about the hype and start caring about the grind. The responsibility mantra. Everything is your fault. Manson dedicates an entire crucial chapter to the principle of responsibility, a concept he argues is the single most powerful shift an individual can make. This is the hardest truth to accept, yet the most liberating. The radical difference, fault versus responsibility. Manson meticulously defines the difference. Fault, vina, a backward-looking concept, who caused the situation. Responsibility, ответственность, a forward-looking concept, who chooses to deal with the situation. Manson's mantra, everything is your fault, is a deliberate provocation to shock the reader out of the victim mindset. He does not mean you are at fault for every bad thing that happens, e.g., being hit by lightning. He means you must accept 100% responsibility for your interpretation and your reaction to every event, regardless of who was at fault. The victim mindset and its false comfort. The victim mindset is comfortable because it provides a convenient explanation for all failure. It's always someone else's fault. This protects the ego and allows the victim to maintain the illusion of innocence. However, this comfort comes at the cost of all power. When you believe you are the perpetual victim of external forces, you are inherently powerless to change your circumstances. Reclaiming power through choice. By accepting responsibility even for events clearly not your fault, you regain your power. Example 1. The failed business. You may not be at fault for the economic crash, but you are responsible for deciding if you try again, if you learn from the mistakes, or if you apply for a new job. Example 2. The abusive relationship. You are not at fault for the abuse, but you are responsible for choosing to leave, seek help, and heal. Manson insists that external control is an illusion. You cannot control what people say, what the market does, or what natural disasters occur. But you always retain the ultimate non-negotiable power, the power to choose the meaning of the event and the power to choose the response. This choice is the essence of true freedom. Applying the responsibility. Mantra. The practical application of the mantra involves 3 steps. Acknowledge the pain. Do not suppress the negative feeling, breaking the feedback loop. Identify your metric. What value is being threatened, e.g., honesty, self-respect? Choose your action. What is the most responsible, value-driven action you can take now, regardless of the outcome? This framework forces you to stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What is my responsibility now?" By focusing on responsibility, you stop giving a fuck about who is to blame and start caring about the only thing that truly matters, your personal controllable action in the face of chaos. This is the difference between living a life driven by reactive emotion and a life driven by chosen values. The final truth: uncertainty and death. The final section synthesizes all previous lessons, grounding the subtle art in the 2 ultimate, undeniable truths of human existence: uncertainty and mortality. By accepting these, we achieve the final, most profound level of not giving a fuck, the terror of certainty and the "I could be wrong" principle. Manson argues that our overwhelming need for certainty, to be right, to know the future, to have a fixed identity, is the source of all ideology, rigidity, and arrested development. The only constant in life is change, and the only certainty is that we are constantly wrong. The fear of being wrong is what drives people to defend false beliefs, cling to bad relationships, and avoid new experiences. Manson introduces the "I could be wrong" principle as the highest moral imperative. Valuing doubt. Instead of seeking certainty, we must seek doubt. Doubt is the mechanism of growth. If you are 100% certain about your life, your values, or your identity, you have closed yourself off to evolution. The identity trap. People cling to fixed identities, e.g., "I am an X person, I only do Y," because it provides a comfortable sense of predictability. But this rigidity prevents necessary change. Manson encourages us to view our identity as a continuous, unfinished process, a series of choices, not a fixed state. The unavoidable nature of failure and rejection. The fear of failure is simply the fear of being wrong about yourself. Manson states that life is a continuous process of learning through error. If you are not failing, you are not trying hard enough. The ultimate freedom comes from accepting the statistical reality that you will fail far more often than you succeed. He encourages us to adopt the metric of, "How many mistakes did I make today?" The more mistakes you make, the more action you took, and the more you learned. You stop giving a fuck about the public perception of your failure and start caring about the internal learning and growth that failure provides. The final epoch: mortality and legacy. The book culminates with the ultimate realization, the inevitability of death. The fear of death is the ultimate motivator of all our superficial pursuits, the chase for legacy, wealth, and immortality. Manson posits that the only way to truly live meaningfully is to use death as a filter. Death clarifies what is important. When you accept your non-existence, you are forced to ask, what is important enough to spend my limited, non-renewable time caring about? The illusion of legacy. Many people try to avoid death by creating an immortal legacy. Manson suggests this is futile. The true value is not in being remembered, but in living authentically in the present. The final choice. By accepting the lack of ultimate cosmic meaning, you are given the incredible freedom to create your own meaning through the values you choose and the suffering you endure. The conclusion of the book is not an offer of hope, but an offer of honesty. The true subtle art of not giving a fuck is the understanding that life is messy, painful, confusing, and temporary. The quality of your life is determined by how consciously you choose your struggles and how courageously you face the two great certainties. You will be wrong, and you will die. That acceptance is the single most powerful act of liberation.